Your time is important to you and to AARP. Now, tracking time with AARP using volunteer hours is fast and easy in the updated Volunteer Portal. Updates to the time tracking process include an easier-to-find tab. What was known as the Time Entry tab is now the Volunteer Hours tab. Use simplified volunteer hours submission and approval processes. Discover intuitive and flexible interface with easy-to-use features such as drop-down options and auto-completed fields to make entering time a breeze, and a new mobile-friendly volunteer hours entry for when you are on the go. In order for simple and accurate time tracking with volunteer hours, a few prerequisites must be completed prior to inputting your time. First, a volunteer must have a contact record with an active volunteer assignment in the Volunteer Portal established by a delegated administrator or staff user. Instructions for creating assignments can be found in the Recruitment Guidebook. Volunteers who are working under grants in the Experience Corps program must also have a corresponding grant contact record to associate time to the active assignment. Grant hours are utilized when a volunteer assignment is expense eligible and associated with a grant. See the Stipends Guidebook for additional information. Next, for programs that require a supervisor approval, a system or delegated administrator must assign approvers to the program's volunteer hours approvers queue. If a program does not require approvals, the time will be automatically approved upon clicking Submit. If a program does require approvals, it will be sent to a supervisor for approval. After these prerequisites are established, the rest is simple. Volunteers will be able to enter hours, view, edit, and submit. To begin entering volunteer hours in the Volunteer Portal, click the Volunteer Hours tab. If you do not see the Volunteer Hours tab, you may need to click the More tab on the far right and select Volunteer Hours from the list. Next, ensure the correct name displays in the volunteer field at the top of the Volunteer Hours window, or if you are a supervisor, search for the correct name using the Select a Volunteer search box. Click the gold New Volunteer Hours button on the right side of the page. A new window will appear. Select the appropriate assignment ID link related to the position for the volunteer hours submission. Verify the dates listed in the header. To modify the record dates displayed, click the arrows to the left or right of the week starting box. Verify the assignment has populated and select the correct category from the drop-down. Enter the number of volunteer hours in each field corresponding to the appropriate day of the week. To enter volunteer hours for more than one assignment, click the Add Line button. Select the assignment and category and enter hours for the applicable days. When necessary, enter additional information in the expanded comments field, such as what was completed during the volunteer hours. Once saved, you can leave and return to this record at a later time to submit the volunteer hours. A green success message will appear once the record has successfully been saved. An error message will appear if more than 24 hours are entered for any given day of the week for all assignments. An error will also show if attempting to submit 0 hours for the week. Click Submit. If a program does not require approvals, the time will be automatically approved upon clicking Submit. If a program does require approvals, it will be sent to the Volunteer Hours approval queue for a supervisor to approve. A green success message will appear once the record has been successfully submitted. The status will also show as submitted on the record at the end of the row. Volunteer hours can be accessed from the Volunteer Hours tab. Records are arranged by submission status and week of date. The Volunteer Hours page will display records by week in sections such as Volunteer Hours Pending Approval, Volunteer Hours Not Submitted, or Volunteer Hours Rejected. If a program uses approvals, volunteers can view their own pending volunteer hours records in the section of the page entitled Volunteer Hours Pending Approval. Click the headers to sort by that column for easier navigation to a particular record. This section contains records that are awaiting approval from a supervisor and also where approvers can access the submissions they need to approve. In the bottom section of the page, volunteers can view their own rejected volunteer hours records to modify the volunteer hours and resubmit. Next, volunteers can view their records that have not yet been submitted in the Volunteer Hours Not Submitted section. Volunteer leaders should review this section to ensure time is submitted promptly to enable volunteers to receive monthly stipends in a timely fashion. Click the Volunteer Hours record to review hours entered for a designated week by clicking on the Volunteer Hours item hyperlink. There are times when you may need to return to a previously created record to edit or submit hours. This may be after you have entered volunteer hours, saved them, and want to return at a later date. You may also need to edit hours if your program uses approvals and they have been rejected during the approval process. Click the Volunteer Hours tab to return to a previously created Volunteer Hours record to edit and submit for approval. Locate the Volunteer Hours record to be edited under the Volunteer Hours Not Submitted section or the Volunteer Hours Rejected section. Click on the Volunteer Hours item hyperlink to access the record. Review volunteer hours entry details for accuracy. If necessary, make changes to the saved record by clicking the lock icon to unlock it. Edit the information, then click Save. To delete a line of volunteer hours, click the Recycle Bin icon. When all volunteer hours entry details are accurate, click Submit. If a program does not require approvals, the volunteer hours entry will be automatically approved upon clicking Submit. If a program does require approvals, it will be sent to the volunteer hours approval queue for a supervisor to approve. In order to approve volunteer hours records, a volunteer portal user must hold a supervisory position for volunteer hours related positions and be assigned to the volunteer hours approver queue. If necessary, contact your program's delegated administrator to be assigned to this queue. Click the Volunteer Hours tab to access time submitted by volunteers under the Volunteer Hours Pending Approval section. Locate the record to approve by clicking any of the headers to sort, such as by Contact or Week of. Below the section are navigation buttons to click through the list, as well as a count of how many records are within that list. Click to access the Volunteer Hours record by clicking on the Volunteer Hours item hyperlink. After reviewing the Volunteer Hours record, determine if it should be approved or rejected. Enter applicable notes regarding the approval. Click Approve or Reject next to the appropriate line. Upon clicking Approve or Reject, the requester will receive an email notification regarding the status of the request, and the status will change. Alright, so let's recap. You've viewed the upgraded volunteer hours in regard to preparation, entering, and viewing previously created volunteer hours. You have also learned about editing and submitting hours and volunteer hours approvals. Congratulations! You have completed the Volunteer Hours module for the Volunteer Portal.